The views expressed on the following program do not necessarily reflect the views of Money Radio staff, management, or advertisers and do not represent an offer to buy or sell any securities.
It's time for Health Futures with Cypress Home Care Solutions, Bob Roth. This is Arizona's only show dedicated to providing you with expert advice on how to live a longer, healthier, and happier life. To learn more, call 602-264-8009. That's 602-264-8009. Now, here's your host, Bob Roth.
Good afternoon. You're listening to Health Futures, taking stock in you. And I'm your host, Bob Roth, and it must be Friday, and indeed it is. We're coming at you live from the Scottsdale Air Park Money Radio Studios, 1510 AM, 105.3 FM, and the World Wide Web, moneyradio1510.com. If this is the first time you're tuning into this show, our show is about how our older adult population can live a happier, healthier life. And how do they do that? They do that by listening right here on Fridays between 12 and 1. And what makes our show really special is our guests. And the show's not about me. It's about the guests we bring onto the show. We've had over 400 shows over 9 years, and I'm real pleased to have in the studio with me first time guest is Katie Brenneman, and she is the founder and president of Stronghold Financial. I love the name. Katie, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Well, thank you for joining me. And you and I had a chance to meet a couple weeks ago, and I'm really enamored with what you're doing. And I felt that this would give you a great platform to share with our listeners about the work that you're doing at Stronghold Financial. So if you wouldn't mind, tell us a little bit about Stronghold Financial and how it came to be.
Yeah, so a little background, I guess. All of my grandparents had their respective experiences with long-term care at the ends of their lives. And what really, I guess, stands out the most is my maternal grandparents, Mimi and Granddad.
Oh, I love it. Mimi and Granddad.
Mimi and Granddad. So at some point, Granddad had to go into the nursing home. And he and Mimi lived back in the D.C. area at the time, and it was $10,000 a month.
Whoa.
Yeah. So Mimi's, healthy, living at home.
Insurance didn't pay for that.
No.
Wow.
Medicare ended at some point in time, and no long-term care insurance existed. So private paying.
Can you give us a time frame? When was this?
Oh gosh, man, it's kind of embarrassing to say I can't even remember.
Right.
Probably about 10 years ago.
Okay.
Maybe longer even, I'd have to say. Yeah. And so Mimi was still paying all the bills at home like normal and stroking that $10,000 a month check. And they still had a few $100,000 of assets at the time. But it's challenging for the healthy spouse because they don't know how long they're writing that check for on the front end. So it's very difficult for most people to know when they're in the moment, can I actually afford this or not? And so Mimi would say all of the heartbreaking things like, what if he lives too long? And what if I run out of money? And it's just such an awful thing to have to hear someone talk about their spouse of 60 plus years that way. It's already hard enough for her to not have him living at home with her anymore.
Right.
And now she has this financial stress on top of the emotional stress. So fast forward, it was 2017. I decided that I was ready to part ways with my previous career. And I called up my two most favorite longstanding clients, Ron and Rick, to let them know. And they said, well, what are you going to do next? I said, I have no idea. And they said, well, why don't you do what we do? You've helped us with some clients over the years. You had this personal family experience. I said, you guys are crazy. I live in Phoenix, Arizona. It's got to be a completely saturated market. And they said, just take a couple of days. So I spent a few days doing some research, and I basically pretended that Mimi and Granddad were still alive, that they lived out here in Arizona. They're going through this situation all over again, and I'm the one helping Mimi navigate it. So what am I going to Google? What am I going to find? Who am I going to call? What are they going to tell me? And over the course of 3 days, I pretty much found only government resources, which is just a bunch of, blah, blah jargon that nobody who's not well-versed in this space is going to understand. I did run across maybe three firms that do some variation of what we specialize in now. And so I did call those firms and kind of explain, hey, my grandparents are going through this. And I really felt like I was bothering them. The response that I got when they answered was really not very sympathetic or warm or inviting.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sitting there going, man, people are going through what's probably the most financially and emotionally stressful time of their lives. And this is the experience that they're having. And so it was just eye-opening. I realized there's a huge need for these services in the Phoenix metropolitan area, in the entire state of Arizona. And so Stronghold was born.
So I want to do a deeper dive. Services.
Yeah.
So let's peel that back. What type of services are we really talking about?
We refer to it as long-term care financial planning.
Got it.
And the real specialty there is with a program called Altex here in Arizona. It stands for Arizona Long-Term Care System. So it's a subdivision of Arizona Medicaid, and it's designed to cover the gap between someone's income and their cost of care at an assisted living or skilled nursing community. It does also offer some in-home care coverage as well, up to 40 hours a week of in-home services if someone prefers to remain in home. But the idea is that these long-term care expenses are obviously extremely expensive and unaffordable for most people for the long haul. And the vast majority of people 65 and up these days are going to experience long-term care in some way, shape, or form throughout their life. And so this program exists to provide financial assistance. Unfortunately, most people think that they need to spend all of their assets down until they're pretty much broke in order to be financially eligible for the program. So most people think I have too much income, too many assets. That program's never for me.
I always thought that.
It's what
there you go.
99% of people think, unless they've had that personal experience.
And I want our listeners to know this, because we're talking about our state's Medicaid program. But when we look at long-term care services, and long-term care services or supportive services are stuff like in-home care, like Cypress does provide, but also, group home, assisted living, skilled nursing, those types of services as well. Typically, they're paid really one of four ways. Private pay, it's paid for by long-term care insurance, it's paid for by veterans benefits, and then lastly, Medicaid, correct?
Correct.
So those are really the only four buckets that any individual in our community has to be able to pay for it.
Correct.
Okay. I just want our listeners to understand that. So the bucket we're talking about is Altex, which is a division of the Medicaid program that we have here in the state.
Yeah. There's a common misconception that Medicare pays for long-term care for long-term care costs. It's usually a rude awakening when people have that first experience. They reach out to their Medicare agent or their insurance company and they find out, oh no, it by no means does. And so like you're mentioning, long-term care insurance is one option, but most people do not have long-term care insurance policies. They've become very unaffordable for the majority of people.
I think the number I heard was 11% of our population
Wow.
has long-term care insurance. And those were the fortunate ones that bought it years ago.
Yeah, and haven't gotten rid of them because
Right.
the rates have become too expensive for them to retain the policies. And even people who do have long-term care insurance, they tend to be vastly underinsured for what long-term care actually costs today.
Right.
So then you're looking at private paying, spending your own assets, using your own income, and with how expensive long-term care has become in today's world, that's just really not affordable for the majority of people for the long term.
You brought up Medicare, and I will tell you, in my business, we disappoint over 50% of our callers because they know they need in-home supportive care, and they ask us if Medicare takes it or their supplement or managed care program does.
Right.
And I have to be the bearer of bad news and say no. And that's really eye-opening, as you said, for individuals. It's like, okay, how do I afford this? How do I pay for this?
Yeah.
And that's why Stronghold Financial's here. And we're going to learn a little bit more in our second segment because I really want to do a deeper dive to really figure out that you don't really need to be impoverished to be on the Medicaid program, because that's what I'm hearing you say.
Correct.
Because that is really what most people think.
Yep.
You're listening to Health Futures, Taking Stock in You. I'm your host, Bob Roth. I've got Katie Brenneman here in the studio. She's the founder and president of Stronghold Financial. And if you want to learn more about Stronghold, how do you find out?
You can go to our website at www.strongholdfin.com, or you can give me a call directly at 480-390-0927.
Perfect. Stick around. We got 3 more segments. We'll be right back.
Now back to Health Futures, taking stock in you. If you have questions about your own or your loved one's future health care, call 602-264-8009. Now, here's your host, Cypress Home Care Solutions, Bob Roth.
Welcome back. You're listening to Health Futures, taking stock in you. I'm your host, Bob Roth, and it is Friday, May the 6th. And we are in our second segment. And if you missed the first segment, I've got Katie Brenneman here in the studio. She's the founder and president of Stronghold Financial. They provide financial services and primarily work in the All-Tech space, which is the Arizona Long-Term Care Service space, a division of the Arizona Medicaid Services, which is actually known as the Arizona Healthcare Cost Containment System. Otherwise known as Access.
Yeah.
That's a mouthful.
I was just going to say that's a mouthful.
That is definitely a mouthful. But if you missed our first segment, go out to our website at cypresshomecare.com. Click on the media button. Third button down is radio show. You'll catch this one and many, many more. So we talked about in the first segment, we talked about how Medicare does not pay for long-term care services. And, I really want us to, do a deeper dive into that. There are 3 ways that you can pay for long-term care services. Can you walk through that?
Yeah, so long-term care insurance policies, which we were talking about, the majority of people don't have. If they do have them, they're typically underinsured for what they need, what their long-term care actually costs. They can spend down their assets, just use their income, use the assets they've accumulated over the course of their life. The scary thing there for people is that, again, you don't know on the front end how much money you're going to need for your care. So it's really hard to tell, can I actually even afford to do this? A lot of people don't realize how expensive long-term care has become. The national average is $8,000 a month. And 80% of people age 65 and older will need long-term care at some point in their life. It's just a question of for how long.
Right. And you told that story about your Mimi.
Yeah.
Where, she was stroking a check for $10,000 a month. She only had a couple $100,000 in her bank account. And, she wanted her husband to live, your grandfather, but at the same time, she was scared to death that she was going to run out of money.
Yeah. And she wrote that check for 2.5 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And that's what people don't realize is that men on average need long-term care for over 2 years on average. Women need long-term care for over 3.5 years on average. And those are averages. So that means some need it for longer, some need it for less. I mean, we have clients that have been on long-term care for 10 plus years.
Wow. And we do as well.
Yeah. So when you start doing the math, it becomes pretty terrifying. You need hundreds of thousands of dollars for just one spouse. What if both spouses need long-term care? It becomes pretty frightening pretty quick.
It does. It does. And when we ended the first segment, we talked about Medicaid and the misinformation, if you would, about having to impoverish yourself and to be able to qualify. So can we talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. What really very few people are aware of the fact that there are federal and state legal strategies. That's always the question that we get is this legal? Yes, it is 100% legal. There are legal strategies that can be implemented to reposition assets to prevent people from having to spend everything down so that it's gone and gone forever. So for a married couple, we can typically protect literally 100% of the combined marital assets for the healthy spouse and qualify the spouse who's in need of long-term care for the All-Techs program to drastically reduce their out-of-pocket, monthly cost of care.
You mean they don't have to get divorced?
That's usually the absolute worst thing that a married couple can do.
But I know people have done that. just so
Yeah.
they could get long-term care supportive services.
Yeah, it's suggested by attorneys and by, their cousin Kathy, whoever, pretty frequently.
Wow.
And it's really about the worst advice that someone can be given. I think in all the years of doing this type of planning, I've seen it as a potential solution for 2 clients. And even then, there were still other options.
But I like how you said they're federal and state legal ways to do this.
Yep.
Nice.
Yeah. So no need to spend everything down. Married couples, we can protect literally 100% of the assets. And then for unmarried individuals, it's commonly thought that you need to spend down to $2,000 until you're eligible for the program. And again, it's not the case. We can typically protect about 50 to 75% of an unmarried individual's assets and still qualify them for the All-Tex program at the same time.
So I think one of the other misleading things about the All-Tex and Medicaid is that it's not free. It really isn't. I mean, they do calculations, right? I mean, when somebody does pass, and there usually is a cost to that, right? I mean, maybe I'm wrong on this. Somebody's going to owe the state government some of the money that they used, right?
Yeah, the state's going to attempt to recover from a remaining estate what they have paid towards someone's benefits over their lifetime. There are protective measures in place to make sure that the healthy spouse is protected until the end of their life as well. They're not going to try to collect while a healthy spouse is still alive. And there's also estate planning that can be done, quite frankly, that can reduce the likelihood, if not eliminate it, that's going to happen based on how the law currently stands. So again, if you plan properly, there are ways to actually prevent the recovery process from taking place.
And I would imagine that part about the estate planning, you probably have some partnerships with some estate planning attorneys to help your clients out.
Definitely.
Because you're not a law firm, right?
Correct. Yeah. We partner with estate planning and elder law attorneys on the legal work when the legal work is needed.
Right. Well, and certainly every single family that you sit down with it's got to be like a snowflake. Not any one is the same.
Yeah.
I mean, have you run into ones that are the same, or every one of them is very different?
Really, no. Yeah, I mean, there's some overlap, obviously, but every client situation is unique, and that's one of the things that our firm really prides ourselves on is we don't implement cookie cutter solutions. There are some firms out there that will try to cram a square peg into a round hole or round peg into a square hole, whichever one that is. And we definitely don't take that approach. We're going to look at the unique situation, all of the specific moving parts for that scenario, and we're going to craft a custom plan for that individual, that married couple, that family's situation to create the best outcome for them based on what they're dealing with.
And I think that's so appropriate because everyone is so unique in terms of what their needs are. And for me, you have really enlightened me, and I'm sure our listeners too, because I've always felt like you needed to get down to that $2,000 a month and give away all your assets.
Yeah.
So it's reassuring to know that and be able to plan effectively.
Yeah. Yeah, one of the things that we've really been trying to educate the community on is as long as you are medically eligible for the All-Tex program, All-Tex is for everyone. There's really no such thing as being, quote unquote, too rich for All-Tex.
So talk about the process about applying for All-Tex, because I know that it's the government, right? It's not there's no simple form that you fill out, right? So
No.
I mean, what does that look like? What's that process look like? If I were to approach you as a client and put all my stuff out on the table and tell you this is where we're at, what would that look like in terms of making that application?
So from the application process standpoint, or even just beginning to work with our firm,
Well,
because there's a lot that leads up to the actual application process.
Let's start with the firm.
Yeah.
Because you have to do a needs analysis, right? You need to really do a deep
100%.
dive into the client's needs to really understand that.
Definitely. Yeah, and we really like to start on the medical side of things because I know what we're capable of doing on the financial. I know I can address someone who's over the income limit. I know that I can address someone who's over the asset limit in the way that they need to be addressed. But I need someone to be at a certain level of need for help in order to be medically eligible for the program. So that's one of the things that we have to have a lot of conversations about is the program's not designed for someone who just needs med management and a little bit of supervisory help, queuing and reminders and just some standby assistance. It's really designed for someone who needs a skilled nursing level of care. That doesn't mean that someone needs to reside in a skilled nursing facility in order to be eligible for the program or receive coverage. But they do, that's just kind of the basic benchmark of it really needs to be a hands-on level of help.
Right.
Unless there's a cognitive impairment that's also bringing, maybe some behaviors or some orientation issues to the situation as well.
No, I like how you need to start with that because that's the biggest part of qualifying, right? You can qualify financially, but if you don't have any medical needs and
Definitely.
healthcare needs, then what's the point?
Exactly. And I don't want anyone wasting time or money moving forward with my firm further
Right.
than it makes sense to.
Right, and typically, what's it? It's at least we use the phrase activities of daily living, right?
Yep.
So being able to get dressed, go to the bathroom, make a meal, it's those types of things that will help an individual qualify.
Correct. Yeah.
So what's it, 2 or 3 activities of daily living that they're not able to do?
Well, that's what most long-term care insurance policies have that as the criteria.
Right.
Alltex is actually assessing 7 activities of daily living.
Wow.
And someone needs to score 60 points on their assessment to be found eligible.
Well, I'll tell you what, we got Jason Mraz taking us out for the first half, but I want to do a deeper dive, even more deeper on the qualifying for Alltex, which is our state's Medicaid program, and in terms of what those things are. Katie Brenneman, thank you for being in the studio. We've learned a lot in the first half. We got a lot more to learn in the second. Stick around. We'll be right back.
Now back to Health Futures, taking stock in you. If you have questions about your own or your loved one's future health care, call 602-264-8009. Now, here's your host, Cypress Home Care Solutions, Bob Roth.
Welcome back. You're listening to Health Futures, Taking Stock in You. I'm your host, Bob Roth, and if you're just tuning in, we're in our second half here. I've got Katie Brenneman here in the studio. She is the founder and president of Stronghold Financial. They're a financial services company that really is specializing in helping people access their benefits to be able to afford and pay for long-term care. If you missed our first half, go up to our website at cypresshomecare.com. Click on the media button. Third button down is radio show. You can catch this show and many, many more. So, Katie, when we left off in the second half, we were talking about our state's Medicaid program. And I was sharing with you some of the things that you need to qualify to receive in-home care benefits for home and community-based service work, and it was ADLs, 2 to 3, and it's very different on the Medicaid side for long-term care supportive services in residential living. And I know you shared there were 7 ADLs, 60%. You need to get it 60% on points or something like that. So, can you kind of like go backwards and just reshare that and really walk us through that?
Yeah, so in order to be found medically eligible for the Alltex program, an individual goes through a medical assessment, and it's done currently as a phone interview, and they're also reviewing medical records in pretty thorough detail. And the phone interview has a series of questions that they're going through to determine how much help does someone need with these 7 activities of daily living. Are they independent with any of them? Do they need more of a supervisory level of help, just cueing and reminders, someone standing nearby? Or do they actually need hands-on physical assistance completing that activity of daily living? And so based on what level of help someone needs, they're going to score a certain number of points. So the more help that's needed, the closer they get to the 60-point minimum. So if someone doesn't have a cognitive impairment like dementia or Alzheimer's, then they really need to require a hands-on level of help where someone is physically completing the activity of daily living for them in order to get to that 60 points. If they do have a dementia or Alzheimer's diagnosis, then they could be at more of a supervisory level of help where maybe they just need some cueing and reminders or someone to set some things up for them. because there's going to be the potential to earn points for the dementia diagnosis as well. And then also, people with dementia or Alzheimer's tend to have some related behaviors like wandering, resistance to self care, disruptive behavior sometimes. And they can earn points for the frequency with which they exhibit those behaviors and also how challenging it is to redirect them.
Interesting. So obviously the points are either they're ascertained by the medical records or the phone interview.
Yeah,
or
it's really
both.
the phone interview, and then they're looking for the diagnoses in the medical records to support what's being shared in the phone interview.
Got it.
Yeah.
So once they do meet that requirement, what happens next?
So our firm always starts with that medical pre-screen first to make sure that this person is highly likely to be found medically eligible for the program, because we know if they are, then we can control things on the income and asset side of things to achieve financial eligibility. So when someone starts working with our firm, we'll then go through a financial intake where we get everything down on paper that's specific to the financial side of the application. And that helps us determine, is this person already financially eligible or very close to it? Or do we need to do restructuring of income, restructuring of assets in order to achieve financial eligibility? So it helps us figure out what needs to be done to get the person from not eligible to eligible.
And do you have a difficulty in ascertaining documents that tell people what their assets are? Because I see that happen a lot where, they own real estate, they own things that they can't get their hands on. I mean, how does that happen for you? I mean, a lot of them are confused, especially when you have someone that has lost a partner. And the partner knows where everything is.
Yeah, we've had situations like that before where the husband was the one who handled everything financial and, up and had a stroke one day, and
Right.
the wife's got to step in and figure out how to pick up where things left off. It can be challenging for sure. I think that we've been pretty lucky, I guess, in our experience with that. We've always been able to find some way to gather the documents that we need. We always have good family involvement, whether it's a spouse or children. Sometimes there's no family and it's just a good friend that someone has that's helping them out. So we've always been able to find a way to get it done, but sometimes it takes some creativity.
I would imagine.
Yeah.
So now you've been able to ascertain the financial information. So you have the medical information, you have the financial information. So what happens next?
So we go to apply, typically speaking. It's going to be a little bit different if they're married or unmarried, if they're over the asset limit or already there. There's some different steps in the process that we have to go through with Altex in order to navigate the situation. But once we have someone financially eligible, then we go to register the Altex application on their behalf. They're going to be assigned a financial worker who's going to conduct a phone interview with their authorized representative, which is the role that we play when someone hires us. They're going to go through that financial interview. All of the documentation that's specific to their situation is going to need to be turned in by a deadline, in a easy to understand fashion, so Altex can clearly see, yes, this person meets the eligibility requirements that we've set forth. They're also going to then be assigned a medical assessor who's going to conduct that official medical interview as well to determine medical eligibility. And so those two things are going simultaneously. And it typically takes us about 4 weeks to get someone through the application process and approved. People trying to navigate the situation on their own, 3, 6, 12 plus months. We've had clients referred to us that have been trying to go through it for years unsuccessfully.
And keep getting declined.
Yeah, it's really sad.
And when you're going through the process, obviously, I'm sure you keep track. Are you 100% getting it accepted? Are you 98%? Do you sometimes see declines? You would think with a professional outfit like yours, you probably very rarely see it. But
it's a good question. We've had I can count on less than one hand how many people we've had medically declined. And every single one, I told the family on the front end, they're not there yet, and they just wanted to try anyway. So we're really good because we do the due diligence on the front end with our medical pre-screen. Our success rate is really 100% when we tell someone you're going to be medically eligible for the program they are. On the financial side of things, we have a 100% approval rate as well.
Nice.
Yeah.
All right, so you've already gone through the medical, you've gone through the financial, you've gone through the application. It takes up to 4 weeks, and you get the approval. What happens next?
So once the approval comes in, they're going to be assigned a case manager. And
Do they get to select which managed care organization that they use? Because in Maricopa County, we have 3.
Correct, yeah. So I say yes. However, sometimes a service provider like an in-home care company or an assisted living community or a skilled nursing facility is contracted with only 1 or 2 of
Got
the
it.
3. So if they already have the service provider picked out, then they have to work within the confines of who that service provider is contracted with as well. But they do have the ability to make a selection.
And that service provider, that managed care organization, they're the ones that authorize the hours, or in my case, would be hours of service. Is that done by Altex, or is that done by the managed care organization?
So Altex is the case manager that the Altex customer is assigned is going to do an assessment to determine how many hours of in-home care they're eligible for. So if they are in-home receiving services, then the case manager is the one that will do an assessment and make that decision.
Got it.
If they're in a community setting, then we obviously know what's being provided. Any of the long-term care services that they need inside of that community are being provided.
So for our listeners, we've taken you through the process, and the process it's not that difficult. It's pretty simple. I mean, we need to do a health evaluation, we need to do a financial health evaluation, and then we need to do an application and get it in through the system. Am I missing anything?
No, although I would say it's not that simple. It sounds simple,
Right.
right?
Right. No, it does. But there are a lot of moving parts within those.
Right.
But that's the process.
Correct.
And the process is contacting a professional outfit like yours.
Yeah.
So as we get ready to wind down the third segment, real quickly, how do people get a hold of Katie Brenneman over at Stronghold Financial?
Yeah, you can go check out our website at www.strongholdfin.com, or someone can give me a call at 480-390-0927.
Perfect. And we got a little Who taking us out, Baba O'Reilly. So stick around. We got one more segment with Katie Brenneman from Stronghold Financial. We're down 3. We got one more to go. We'll be right back. You know, the safety of older loved ones during this pandemic has posed the greatest challenge for many families. Hi, this is Bob Roth, managing partner of Cypress Home Care Solutions. I know many of you are nervous to choose a communal living option for your elderly loved ones these days, but home care remains the safest alternative. For over 25 years, Cypress Home Care has served our community, and today we continue to help families by placing high-quality caregivers into their homes that follow the strictest CDC safety and testing guidelines. Cypress Home Care is here for them, and we're here for you. Bathing, meal preparation, medication reminders, and so much more, whether it's a couple times a week or every day. So if you want to keep your loved ones safe and at home, call us today at 602-264-8009 or look us up on the web at cypresshomecare.com.
Now back to Health Futures, taking stock in you. If you have questions about your own or your loved one's future health care, call 602-264-8009. Now, here's your host, Cypress Home Care Solutions, Bob Roth.
Welcome back. You're listening to Health Futures, Taking Stock in You. I'm your host, Bob Roth, and we're in our 4th segment here with Katie Brenneman from Stronghold Financial. We got a little Steely Dan taking us into the 4th segment. Thank you, James. If you missed the first 3 segments, go up to our website at cypresshomecare.com. Click on the media button. 3rd button down is radio show. You'll catch those first 3 segments and more. So, Katie, we have really walked through for our listeners and for me for through these first 3 segments about the Altex plan and how you qualify and, you know, what the nuances are. And really, you know, it's been an educational process for me because I've always felt like that long-term care insurance was just for those that were impoverished. And There, that you could have too much money and you could never qualify.
Yeah.
So one of the things I like to do, and you and I talked in between the third and fourth segment, is to give some real life studies and cases and talking about eligibility and some of the other things that you've gone through. So can you walk me and our listeners through some examples?
Yeah, definitely. I think one of my favorite really illustrates the picture that there's no such thing as being too rich for the Altex program, and also that someone could have a relatively high level of net worth. And you might look at them and think, why does that person ever need the Altex program? They have over $1 million, and there
Right.
could still very much be a need. So several years ago, we had a married couple referred to us. It was Barb, actually. Barb's husband, Mark, was 61 years old at the time. He had dementia. He was living in a memory care community here in town, and his cost of care was $6,000 a month. Barb was only 51 at the time, and they actually had a 13-year-old daughter as well. So Mark and Barb had a little over $1.3 million in total counted assets, and Barb made over 6 figures a year at her job. But she was terrified when she came to talk with us that she was going to spend $72,000 a year on her husband's long-term care cost. She's working full-time. How's she going to continue to provide for her daughter and herself and save for her retirement, send her daughter to college? She was a really numbers-oriented person, and she'd actually made a spreadsheet and showed us that her after-tax take-home pay was basically covering her husband's long-term care.
$72,000.
Yeah. She was working to pay for his long-term care.
Wow.
And he was physically healthy. So at 61, I mean, he could live 10 plus years. If he lived 10 years, his total long-term care cost was going to be over $900,000 at that point.
Wow.
So she was terrified. And unfortunately, she'd actually met with a different Altex planning firm prior to ours that had told her that because of her large 401k that she had at work, it was over $700,000, and due to her age and still working, that she actually wasn't able to ever qualify for the Altex program under those circumstances, because that $700,000 401k couldn't be accessed to be repositioned in order to obtain financial eligibility. So it was completely incorrect information that she'd been provided with, and luckily the memory care community knew of our firm and said, maybe go get a second opinion. So we were actually able to qualify Mark for the Altex program. We protected all $1.3 million for Barb in the process.
Nice.
Yeah, and it brought Mark's out-of-pocket monthly cost down to about $1,500 a month.
Whoa.
So $4,500 a month savings from what Barb had been paying previously.
That's incredible. No, I totally understand now the work that you do. Now, are there any other examples you'd like to share? Because I got to tell you, I mean, visualizing these examples help me and help our audience. I mean, how many people do we know that are in the same situation as Barb and Mark are? And I get the reason why they got turned down. And a lot of people don't think they could even go that route.
Exactly.
Not even try to put their put their name or application in.
Right. Yeah. People call us all the time and say, I heard I should talk with you. I probably will never qualify for this, but is something possible?
Right.
So yeah, I think another good example is an unmarried individual, just to have the contrast. Several years ago, we had a 51-year-old woman named Kathy. She was living in a skilled nursing facility at the time. She was on dialysis. And dialysis is extremely expensive. It's about $1,000 a day out of pocket. So it was a $30,000 a month cost of care at the skilled nursing facility.
Wow.
Yeah. And Kathy had actually already been disabled prior to the incident that had landed her in the hospital and then the skilled nursing facility. So she had Social Security disability income of $1,600 a month. That was it income-wise. And she did actually have about $1 million that she had inherited from her dad, who had passed away a year or so prior. And her sisters came to us because they were absolutely terrified that Kathy was going to recover. And I mean, at $30,000 a month, you can blow through $1 million pretty quickly.
Oh, yeah.
So they're terrified that she's going to blow through this $1 million, recover, be able to move back home and live either fully independently or, maybe need a little help. But not have any of her assets left over and only have her $1,600 a month Social Security disability. And she can't work. So what's going to happen to her? And so in a situation like that, I mean, if they'd gone to Altex right off the bat, Altex would have said, well, she's unmarried. She can't have more than $2,000. Go spend $998,000 and then come back and apply for the program. And then her sisters were just terrified of that thought. So it was really sad. Kathy ended up actually passing away really unexpectedly through this process. So we weren't able to actually implement this plan. But what we were working on with that family was taking the $1 million and purchasing a variety of properties. And we were going to title the properties inside of an LLC and turn them into rentals. So we essentially took this $1 million of cash and turned it into a revenue generating business. And Altex can't count something as both an asset and an income. It's one or the other.
Right.
If it's done properly, that it can be an exempt asset generating income.
That's so creative.
It is. And that's just really the whole point is we don't want to implement these cookie cutter plans. We want to look at, given the unique situation, what can we do here to create the best outcome for the family? And in that situation, we were going to be able to generate this rental income for Kathy that, yes, it would have gone to the skilled nursing facility as part of her room and board payment, part of her Altex share of cost. But if she recovered down the road, she would have that rental income as income. If she needed to sell one of the properties to generate cash, the family would have been able to sell one of the properties, liquidate it, and have this cash infusion for Kathy. And they also were able to set up the estate planning in such a way that if and when Kathy passed away, the two sisters would inherit the LLC from her and be able to retain that net worth for the family that it was important for Dad to pass on.
Wow, it sounds like a lot of thought went into that. And knowing that it's not a cookie cutter approach, that you really have to understand all the details. You have to really dig in to really understand what the needs are.
Yeah.
So, Katie, we have about 30 seconds. And what I want to do with the last 30 seconds is to have you, leave our listeners with any lasting thoughts. Is there a question that I haven't answered that you would like to answer? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I would say it's just never too soon to start planning. The sooner you start planning, the more options and flexibility you have. We have married couples referred to us regularly who maybe one spouse just was diagnosed, but it's early on, or maybe both are still healthy and there's still planning that can be done that far in advance so that it's not reacting in crisis.
And how do they, once again, get a hold of Stronghold Financial?
Yeah, check out our website at www.strongholdfin.com or give me a call at 480-390-0927.
Katie Brenneman, so great to see you again and have you in our studio. And doing anything fun for the weekend?
Just doing a little Mother's Day celebration on Sunday.
There you go.
Yeah.
Happy Mother's Day to everyone out there. Make it a great day. Have a great weekend. We'll be back next Friday.
There's no place like home. You've been listening to Bob Roth's Health Futures. If you have questions about your own or your loved one's future health care, call Cypress Home Care Solutions at 602-264-8009. That's 602-264-8009. Or visit cypresshomecare.com. Be sure to join Health Futures with Bob Roth every Friday at noon, right here on Money Radio 1510 and 105.3 FM.